Hey adventurers! Today we're going to be doing another episode in our 5 Elements of Story series. We're going to be talking about world/setting. So this is related a lot to fantasy or other world type things, or maybe not fantasy, or low fantasy. Maybe it takes place on Earth, but the society is very different from where we're at. And then we also talk a little bit about setting in addition.
But it's not just these new things that you take. It's when you actually, if it's on Earth in something that is known, then it's when you go into that place that is known and really find out what makes it what it is.
Right, that's a good point. So like I said with society, it's very related to what people live in. So the culture that Tony and I know is very different from the culture of even different parts of the U.S.
Yes.
So it's that type of describing that difference is kind of what we're going to be focusing on.
Yeah. So as always, we are following that initial outline that we gave however many videos ago, and the 3 main points that we had, starting with the first one, is we need to clearly be able to see the world the author is building in our minds.
The author needs to give us small details throughout the story. Using the 5 senses is a great way. So like we want to smell the smoke in the air, we want to smell the scent of this town that you're in. That type of thing is going to make us really start to feel grounded. We want to see specific things that are maybe unique to us, the readers, but everyday life to this world. Those are the things that I really love in a world and setting.
That can be a very interesting way to deeply add to the story that you're telling and immerse your reader.
Extraneous exposition isn't needed extensively, but bits here and there can really enhance the picture.
We really want to see how the world affects the characters, how the world makes the characters who they are, and why it makes them live the life that they do.
Yeah. So our next point is that life here needs to be livable and lovable. We need to be able to imagine living life in this world. It doesn't have to be pleasant to imagine, but we need to be able to actually see it. This is pretty closely connected with the previous point due to the fact that it's executed/shown in a very similar way through describing details and those unique details that are everyday life to that world, that type of thing.
This is where adjectives can be useful, especially for describing the visual and other senses. I don't think that I or Kate thinks that it should be overdone, that adjectives should be overused here, but this is where you can use them and they can be extremely powerful and extremely effective.
It's really cool how I think of the Hunger Games where it's not necessarily a world you would want to live in, but there's aspects of it that are really endearing. You kind of do want to live there. I mean, you don't want to go into the Hunger Games and you don't want to live under that tyranny and that type of government, but it's so intriguing and there's so much about it that is appealing. Dystopian worlds tend to be like that, I feel like. Even The Giver, where you don't want to live there. And half of these dystopian worlds, the main story is changing the world as they know it. And that's an amazing theme, but it's like you want to visit it. You don't want to live there, but you want to visit.
Yeah, I think that's why dystopian books lend themselves so well to the film medium, because that world is so visual, so easy to understand with your senses. That, I mean, I think of Hunger Games and Giver, like we already said, they're both just so vivid in our minds that when you try and put them to film, translate them to a film, it just works so naturally.
Yeah. It really does. And it's interesting because the governments of both of those dystopian worlds we gave are places we would not want to live under.
Absolutely.
But there's other things about the people, I think, is what's appealing.
They just feel very real.
Yeah.
It feels very realistic.
And it's scary almost.
It
how
is.
real, because that stuff could actually happen, and that's what's scary.
Yes. So the third and final point that was on our outline is it needs to have a history and a fleshed out society that feels real and clearly influences how and why the world is where it is. So if you look at the history of the United States, it shaped what is in 2020. It shapes how the world is in 2020. You can't have the United States without the Revolutionary War or without the American Civil War or any of these other wars, they were necessary to where we are today.
To establish the
horrible.
freedoms, yeah.
Yes, to establish the freedoms, to establish the nation itself in many ways.
To unify it.
Yeah, but it's not that we're saying that these things weren't horrible and that we wish they wouldn't have happened, but at the same time, without them having happened, life would be so different in the United States. That's how it needs to be in a story, is the world needs to be so clearly affected and influenced by the history, by its past, by the things that have happened, so that when you look at what the world is that is being shown to you through the pages, you see, I can understand why it would be like that.
What built it to where it is that day. So just like we talked about how a history shaped a world, we can't have a perfect world. We can't have a society that's a utopia.
Rainbows and bubbles.
It's not realistic. There needs to be conflicts for realism between people, between different parties, and also because a story isn't really a story without some sort of conflict.
Yeah. I mean, even Little Women, which is not a story about a war or anything like that, there's conflict within it.
Yeah, and a lot of the conflict, and this is how it can be, it's not necessarily conflict. It doesn't always have to be conflict between two characters, although that's usually what we see, or two parties, like good guys, bad guys, but it can be conflict within themselves, and people struggling with their own, trying to improve themselves.
We chose conflict very specifically because it does not necessarily mean clashing of ideologies or clashing of physical whatever, so it doesn't necessarily mean beating each other up with swords. That conflict can be, it's such an overarching thing that it grabs from all those things and really simplifies them into one word, and that's why we chose conflict for this specific point.
Also, on the note of Little Women, there is a lot of conflict between rich and poor people, and not as in one is better than the other. That's not the battle. What the battle is being contented with what you have. And so that's another interesting thing, and does take place during the Civil War. So. One thing I really love in a world or setting and story is when you can feel like a character is making history as they go through it. So,
sorry.
Once again, I'm back to The Giver and The Hunger Games. In The Hunger Games, Katniss is making history, especially as we get through the later books. And it's the same way with The Giver. Jonas changed that society. So.
Yeah.
And he made history with himself, for himself.
Yeah.
With himself.
I haven't finished the Giver Quartet yet, but I will hopefully finish that by the end of the year. It's interesting to think about, we've given all these things that we want to see in a story that makes a story good, but there's also these things that we need to look at from the point of view of what don't we like in a world, in a story, what tropes, what types of things like that do we not want to see in a story because either they feel overused or they're weak. And I'm trying to think of a good one on the spot because we didn't happen to write one down.
Well, I know for me, a utopia is one I don't like to see, or where we have a world that's set up and it's set up in a negative way and we can see that it's negative, but it's too justified. That comes across as bad. It comes across as almost like the author's ideals coming out, which is a little bit disturbing if they have that ideal, especially when some of them are American authors. I don't like a utopia. I don't like a perfect world where there isn't wrong, and I don't like a bad world that's overly justified in its reasonings of being bad. And I can't give you an example, although Panem is on the verge of it.
Yeah.
Not
well,
there.
so is the one in The Giver.
The Giver is a much better example. It is, because you see it and you're like, well, this might not be bad. You know, there's not jealousy, there's not this, the pain, there's no pain.
The whole idea of precision of language, where you use the word that you actually mean, that right there is something that I do wish we had in our world, because it would simplify so much of everything.
But the problem with it is it took away everything that's also good.
Took away free will.
It took away free will, which is, it took away liberty, which is a God-given right. It took away free will, which is something that God also gave us. And that's exactly the things that we have to fight for.
Yeah. So mine is not nearly as deep as Kate's, but I was just thinking about tropes that I dislike, and one that Fina in A World of Endless Pages mentioned was when animals attack without cause. Unprovoked animals attack without... I mean, it's understandable if the bear is protecting her child, her cub. But... Man-child.
Man-child.
But it's something completely different when there's just... I don't know, I can't even think of a good example.
No,
but when
I
there's just an
understand.
animal out in the wild and it decides to attack you. Because most of the time animals aren't aggressive like that. They're very family-oriented. They'll protect their family. But they're not just going to go kill you to kill you. That's not how animals are.
The author's sticking it in there to create a twist on the story, but they're taking away the realism of the story by doing that.
It's bad conflict.
Yeah.
Because it's not realistic.
Yeah. Conflict, we're back to that word.
Yeah. Anyways, so that's just kind of some things that we dislike but see, we were saying that we dislike that we dislike a utopia type society, but it works so well in The Giver. So it's not necessarily that we dislike it, it's that
it's scary.
Well, okay, so here's why we don't dislike it in The Giver, is because it's not looked on as in a good light. It's not shown in a good light.
In the long run, yeah, that's what they're trying to break free from.
Yes. Who's the author?
Lois Lowry.
Lois Lowry, right. Lois Lowry doesn't make that society something that's perfect, that's beautiful, that's amazing. She makes it seem that way to the characters,
and
but
to
the readers
us superficially as well.
Yeah.
Right. Like you said, the precision of language, she says, yeah, I would like that. But there was so much more around that. There's reasons why we don't have that.
Yeah. So you have to understand what we're getting at with these, and it's kind of hard to sometimes because our thoughts are a little bit haphazard.
Yeah.
But it's an interesting way to think about it, and I think it's for a writer. I know Kate's a writer. You guys maybe not, but you do now. Kate's a writer. I have done a little bit of dabbling in writing, and being able to understand what it is about a world that you do like, but also understand what it is about a world that you don't like, makes you be able to write that world so much more believably.
Yeah. Things we're working on.
Yeah. All right, well, that's the end of our outline that we had. We hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please like and comment down below. Let us know if you agree with us on this. This is the type of topic that we want to have conversation about, because our opinions could easily change on these. These are from what we've seen. This is what our experience tell us.
We did mention The World of Endless Pages, that YouTube channel, and we will link that down below in the description box.
Thanks for watching, guys. Stay warm.
I drank all my water. At least I know what happens in Lord of the Rings.
I know what happens in Little Women.
I don't. You're like, Meg dies!
Beth dies. Florence Pugh marries Timothy Chalamet.
That's not
those characters.
Who are they?
Amy and Laurie. Or Laurie. And then
Christian Bale is back.
Bear with the big nose marries, he's a German dude. He marries Elizabeth.
What?
It's not Elizabeth, that's Pride and Prejudice. I don't
just
remember.
married. He just married Elizabeth Bennet and Mr. Bear. Bear.
Anyways.
Okay.